The wheelchair wheels stopped just inches from the desk, and Vittorio Marchetti slammed his fist down so hard that the glass of whiskey beside him toppled and shattered on the marble floor. Nobody in the room moved to clean it up. Nobody dared. "I will not marry a stranger because my father wrote it into his will," Vittorio said, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't care what the lawyers say. I don't care what the family council says. I am not some prize to be handed over." Edmund Cole, the family's longtime advisor, stood near the window with his hands folded behind his back. He had served Vittorio's father for 30 years, and he had learned long ago that patience was the only weapon that worked against a Marchetti temper. "Your father's will is clear," Edmund said quietly. "You marry within 1 year of his passing, or the council transfers control of the family's businesses to your cousin Damien. You know what Damien will do with that power. You've seen it already, in the way he moves against you when he thinks no one is watching." Vittorio's jaw tightened. 6 months ago, a bullet meant to end his life instead took away the use of his legs. He had survived the ambush, but the man who walked out of that warehouse and the man who now sat in a wheelchair were not the same person. He had lost more than his ability to walk. He had lost the fear his name once carried on the streets. And now his own father, even from the grave, was trying to control him. "Find someone," Vittorio finally said, his voice flat. "Someone who understands this is a contract, nothing more." Edmund nodded slowly. He already had someone in mind. 2 days later, a black car pulled through the iron gates of the Marchetti estate and stopped in front of the wide stone steps. Camille Dubois stepped out, smoothing down the front of her deep green dress with steady hands, though her heart was pounding hard enough that she was certain everyone could hear it. Her family owned a small chain of bakeries across the city, but 3 years ago, a bad loan from a Marchetti associate had left them buried in debt. When Edmund Cole had come to her father with an offer, it had not felt like a choice at all. Marry the Marchetti heir. Save the family business. Camille had said yes before her father could even finish explaining the terms, because she had seen the fear in his eyes, and she could not bear to watch her family lose everything they had built. She had heard stories about Vittorio Marchetti. Everyone in the city had. He was feared, respected, and after the shooting, pitied by some, though she suspected pity was the one thing he could not stand. A tall butler with silver hair led her through the marble entrance hall, past oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and into a study where a man sat behind a heavy wooden desk. He did not stand to greet her. He could not. Camille had prepared herself to see him in a wheelchair. What she had not prepared for was the intensity in his dark eyes, sharp and assessing, as if he were already trying to find the trick hidden inside her. "Miss Dubois," Vittorio said, his tone as cold as the marble beneath her feet. "Please, sit." She sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I assume Edmund has explained the terms," he continued. "This is a business arrangement. We will marry, you will fulfill the requirements written in my father's will, and in exchange, your family's debts will be cleared. There is nothing more to this than that. I do not expect affection, and I certainly will not offer any in return." Camille felt a flicker of anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "I understand the terms perfectly, Mr. Marchetti. I am not here for romance. I am here to help my family. As long as you keep your word, I will keep mine." Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or maybe respect, though it vanished so quickly she could not be sure she had seen it at all. "Good," he said. "The wedding will take place in 3 weeks. Small, private, and strictly for appearances. Edmund will handle the arrangements. You may bring whatever belongings you need. This will be your home now." Camille glanced around the study, at the towering bookshelves and the heavy curtains that blocked out most of the daylight, and she felt the weight of what she was agreeing to settle onto her shoulders. This was not a home. It was a fortress, cold and guarded, much like the man in front of her. "Is there anything else?" she asked. "No," Vittorio said, already turning his attention to the papers on his desk, dismissing her without another word. Camille rose from her chair, and just as she reached the door, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said, "I'm sorry about what happened to you. The shooting, I mean. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been." Vittorio's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "I don't want your pity." "It wasn't pity," Camille said simply. "It was sympathy. There's a difference." And with that, she walked out, leaving him staring after her, unsettled by the calm confidence in her voice. 3 weeks passed in a blur of dress fittings and legal paperwork. Camille barely saw Vittorio during that time, only catching glimpses of him being wheeled through the halls by a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Rowan, who served as both bodyguard and physical therapist. The wedding itself was small, exactly as Vittorio had promised. It took place in the estate's private chapel, attended only by Edmund, a handful of trusted family associates, and Camille's parents, who could not stop thanking her with tearful eyes even as she stood at the altar in a dress that had been chosen for her rather than by her. Vittorio wore a dark suit, his wheelchair positioned at the front of the chapel, his expression unreadable. When the priest asked them to exchange vows, his words were clipped and practiced, void of any real feeling. Camille spoke hers with more warmth than she intended, surprising even herself. When it came time for the rings, Vittorio's hand brushed against hers, and for just a moment she felt him hesitate, as if the contact unsettled him more than he expected. The reception, if it could be called that, lasted less than an hour. There was no dancing, no toasts, no laughter. Just quiet conversation among the guests, while Vittorio sat near the back of the room, watching everything with the same guarded expression he always wore. Camille approached him once the last of the guests had begun to leave. "That's it then," she said. "We're married." "That's it," Vittorio agreed. "I'll stay out of your way," Camille offered. "You won't even know I'm here." Vittorio studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "See that you do," he said, and wheeled himself away without another word. Camille stood alone in the empty reception hall, still wearing her wedding dress, feeling more like a stranger in her own life than she ever had before. She thought about her family, safe now because of the choice she had made, and she reminded herself why she had agreed to this in the first place. But as she made her way to the room that had been prepared for her, deep in that cold, silent mansion, she could not shake the memory of the flicker of surprise in Vittorio's eyes when she had refused to offer him pity. There was a man buried somewhere beneath all that ice and control, she was certain of it. Whether she would ever see him again was another question entirely. That night, unable to sleep, Camille wandered down to the kitchen, hoping a cup of tea might settle her restless mind. She did not expect to find Vittorio there, alone at the table, his wheelchair pulled close, a single glass of water in front of him untouched. He looked up, startled by her presence, and for the first time since she had arrived, he did not immediately put his guard back up. "Couldn't sleep?" Camille asked softly, moving toward the kettle. "I don't sleep much anymore," Vittorio admitted, and then seemed to catch himself, as if he had said more than he intended. Camille said nothing, simply filled the kettle and set it to boil, giving him the space to speak or stay silent, whichever he preferred. It was a small thing, but it was the first honest moment either of them had shared, and neither of them knew yet just how much that single quiet night would come to matter in the months ahead. The following morning, Camille woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and, for a moment, forgot where she was. Then the weight of everything came rushing back. She was married, she was living in the Marchetti estate, and somewhere in this enormous house, a man who did not want her here was probably already awake, already working, already treating her like a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong room. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, determined not to hide in her room like a guest waiting for permission to exist. The dining room was empty except for a housekeeper named Margaret, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair who barely looked up from arranging the table settings. "Good morning," Camille said brightly. hoping warmth might soften the tension in the room. Margaret's eyes flicked over her, taking in every detail from her simple dress to the soft curve of her figure, and something like disapproval passed briefly across her face before she composed herself. "Good morning, Mrs. Marchetti," she said stiffly, and returned to her work without another word. Camille felt her cheeks warm, but she refused to let it show. She had grown up in a bakery, surrounded by flour and sugar and the honest, comforting smell of bread rising in the oven. She had spent years being told by strangers that she did not look the way a woman in her position should look, and she had learned long ago that the only way to survive those judgments was to refuse to shrink beneath them. She took her seat at the long dining table, alone, and ate her breakfast in silence, listening to the quiet clinking of dishes and the distant sound of someone moving through the halls. It was nearly noon when she finally saw Vittorio again. He was in the estate's private garden, sitting near a stone fountain, a leather folder of documents balanced across his lap. Rowan stood a short distance away, giving him space but staying close enough to help if needed. Camille approached slowly, unsure if she would be welcome, but decided that hiding in her room for the rest of her marriage was not a life she was willing to accept. "It's a beautiful garden," she said, coming to stand near the fountain. Vittorio did not look up from his papers. "It was my mother's favorite place in the house." "Was?" Camille asked gently. "She passed away when I was young," he said, his tone clipped, clearly meant to end the conversation. Camille took the hint but did not leave. Instead, she sat down on the stone bench across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "I used to spend my afternoons in my family's bakery," she said. "Flour on my hands, sugar in my hair. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I think everyone needs a place like that, somewhere that feels like home, even when everything else feels complicated." Vittorio finally looked up, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "Is that what this is? A complication? Isn't it?" Camille asked, holding his gaze. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vittorio closed his folder and set it aside. "You're not what I expected," he admitted quietly. "What did you expect?" "Someone who would be afraid of me," he said. "Someone who would flinch at the mention of my family's business, or the wheelchair, or any of it." Camille tilted her head, considering him. "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Marchetti. I've seen fear before, in my father's eyes when the debts became too much to bear. That kind of fear breaks people. I decided a long time ago that I would not let anything break me the same way." Something shifted in Vittorio's expression, a crack in the careful armor he wore so well. Before he could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps interrupted them. Edmund appeared at the garden entrance, his face tight with urgency. "Vittorio," he said, "we have a problem. The Castellano family is questioning the marriage. They believe it's a sign of weakness, that you rushed into this arrangement because you're vulnerable after the shooting. They're testing the waters, seeing how far they can push before we push back." Vittorio's expression hardened instantly, all traces of the quiet moment with Camille disappearing. "What do they want?" "A meeting," Edmund said. "Tonight. They want to see the two of you together, to judge for themselves whether this marriage is real or simply a desperate move to protect the family's image." Camille felt her stomach tighten. She had known, in theory, that this marriage came with dangers beyond awkward family dinners and disapproving housekeepers. But hearing it spoken aloud, the reality of what she had agreed to settled over her like a heavy blanket. "I'll do it," she said before Vittorio could respond. Both men turned to look at her, surprised. "If they want to see us together, then we'll show them. I didn't marry into this family to hide in a room upstairs while everyone else decides my fate." Vittorio studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his dark eyes. "Fine," he said. "Tonight. But you follow my lead. This is not a game, Camille. These people are dangerous, and if they sense weakness, they will exploit it." "I understand," Camille said, and she meant it. That evening, Camille, dressed in a deep burgundy gown, that Margaret had reluctantly helped her select, and made her way down to the estate's formal dining room, where the Castellano family had already begun to arrive. Their leader, a sharp-eyed man named Dominic Castellano, greeted Vittorio with a handshake that lasted just a moment too long, his eyes studying the wheelchair with poorly concealed calculation. "Vittorio," Dominic said smoothly, "it's good to see you well. And this must be your new wife." "Camille," Vittorio said, his voice steady and controlled. "My wife." Dominic turned his attention to Camille, his gaze sweeping over her in a way that made her skin crawl, though she refused to let it show. "A pleasure," he said. "Though I admit, I expected someone different for a man in your position, Vittorio. Someone more polished, perhaps." The insult was subtle, wrapped in false politeness, but Camille understood exactly what he meant. She felt Vittorio tense beside her, but before he could respond, she stepped forward, a calm smile on her face. "Mr. Castellano," she said sweetly, "I've found that polish tends to crack under pressure. I prefer substance. It tends to hold up much better when things get difficult, don't you think?" A flicker of surprise crossed Dominic's face, quickly hidden behind a practiced smile. "Clever," he said, "and loyal, it seems." "Extremely," Camille replied, resting her hand lightly on Vittorio's shoulder, a gesture that surprised them both. She felt him go still beneath her touch, but he did not pull away. The dinner continued, tense and carefully controlled, every word measured, every glance calculated. Camille watched as Vittorio navigated the conversation with practiced skill, deflecting probing questions and subtle threats, with the same cold precision he used in his business dealings. She found herself stepping in when needed, offering charm where he offered ice, and by the end of the evening, she could see the doubt in Dominic Castellano's eyes had softened, though it had not disappeared entirely. When the last of their guests finally left, Vittorio wheeled himself into the study, and Camille followed, unsure if she was welcome, but unwilling to simply retreat to her room after everything they had just endured together. "You did well tonight," Vittorio said, his voice quieter than she had heard it before. "Better than well." "I told you," Camille said. "I'm not afraid of difficult situations." Vittorio studied her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "No," he agreed. "I don't suppose you are." For the first time since she had arrived at the Marchetti estate, Camille felt something shift between them, a fragile thread of understanding stretched thin but undeniably present. She did not know what it meant, or where it might lead, but she knew, standing there in the dim light of his study, that the man in front of her was far more complicated than the cold, guarded figure she had first met 3 weeks ago. "Good night, Vittorio," she said softly, and turned to leave. "Camille," he said, stopping her at the door. She turned back to find him watching her with an expression she had not seen before, something almost vulnerable beneath the careful control. "Thank you," he said simply. It was not much, 2 small words, spoken quietly in an empty study. But for a man who had built walls around himself as high and unyielding as the ones surrounding his family's estate, it felt like the beginning of something neither of them was quite ready to name. Weeks passed, and slowly, without either of them fully realizing it, a routine began to form between Camille and Vittorio. She would find him most evenings in the garden or the study, and instead of retreating to her room, she began to stay, filling the silence with conversation he rarely invited but never turned away. One evening, nearly a month into their marriage, Camille came downstairs later than usual and found the study empty. She wandered through the quiet halls until she heard a sound coming from a room she had not yet explored, a heavy door left slightly open at the end of a long corridor. Curious, she pushed it open gently and stopped in the doorway, startled by what she saw. It was a private therapy room, fitted with parallel bars, mats, and various equipment she did not recognize. Vittorio was there, gripping the bars with white-knuckled hands, sweat soaking through his shirt as he tried, again and again, to push himself upright, his legs trembling beneath him before giving out completely. Rowan stood nearby, ready to catch him, but Vittorio waved him off each time, refusing help, determined to do it alone. Again, Vittorio said through gritted teeth, and tried once more, only to collapse back into his chair, his chest heaving with exhaustion and frustration. Camille should have left. She knew, somehow, that this was not something Vittorio wanted anyone to see. A private battle he fought behind closed doors, away from the eyes of his men, his family, anyone who might mistake his struggle for weakness. But something kept her rooted to the spot, and before she could decide what to do, Vittorio's eyes lifted and found her standing in the doorway. The look on his face was not anger, as she expected. It was something closer to shame, quickly masked by a familiar coldness. "You shouldn't be here," he said sharply. "I'm sorry," Camille said softly, stepping into the room rather than retreating. "I didn't mean to intrude." "Then leave," Vittorio said, his voice tight with something she recognized now as vulnerability, disguised as anger. Camille hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she said. "I don't think I will." Vittorio stared at her, clearly unprepared for her refusal. Rowan glanced between them, unsure whether to intervene, but something in Camille's steady expression made him step back instead, giving them space. "You don't understand," Vittorio said, his voice lower now, stripped of its usual sharp edges. "Everyone out there thinks I'm still the man I was before, feared, untouchable. If they see this, if they see me like this, they'll think I'm finished, weak, and in my world, weakness gets you killed." Camille moved closer, crouching down slightly so she was closer to his eye level, an act that felt strangely intimate given everything between them. "I don't think you're weak," she said quietly. "I think you're fighting harder than anyone I've ever met. There's a difference between struggling and losing, Vittorio. You haven't lost anything except your fear of letting someone see you try." For a long moment, Vittorio said nothing, simply studying her with an expression that had lost all its usual guardedness. Then, slowly, he reached for the parallel bars again. "Will you stay?" he asked, so quietly she almost missed it. "Yes," Camille said simply, and sat down on a nearby bench, watching as he pushed himself upright once more, his arms shaking with effort, his jaw set with determination. This time, when his legs trembled and threatened to give out, Camille did not look away, and somehow, that made all the difference. He held himself upright a few seconds longer than before, and when he finally lowered himself back into the chair, exhausted but not defeated, something like pride flickered across his face. "Better," Rowan said approvingly from the corner of the room. "Better," Vittorio agreed, and for the first time since Camille had met him, he almost smiled. After that night, something between them changed permanently. Camille began joining him in the therapy room several evenings a week, not offering pity or unwanted advice, simply sitting nearby, a quiet presence that seemed to steady him more than any amount of professional encouragement ever could. Their conversations grew longer, easier, filled with small details about their pasts, their families, the lives they had lived before fate tangled them together in this strange, complicated marriage. Camille learned that Vittorio had been forced into the family business far younger than he ever wanted, that beneath his cold exterior was a man who had spent his entire life proving himself worthy of a legacy he never asked to inherit. Vittorio learned that Camille's warmth was not naivety, but a hard-won strength forged through years of being underestimated and dismissed by people who judged her before ever truly knowing her. But not everyone in the Marchetti household welcomed the growing closeness between them. Damien Marchetti, Vittorio's cousin, had watched the developing bond with narrowed eyes and a simmering resentment that grew sharper with each passing week. He had expected the marriage to fail quickly, expected Vittorio's coldness to drive away any woman foolish enough to accept the arrangement, clearing the path for himself to seize control when the year deadline passed unmet. Instead, he watched Camille slowly chip away at walls that had kept everyone else at a safe distance for years, and it infuriated him. He began finding small ways to undermine her. Subtle comments dropped in front of family associates about her background, her family's financial troubles, her appearance. At first, Camille ignored it, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But Damien was patient, and cruelty, she was learning, often found ways to escalate when it went unchallenged. The moment came during a formal dinner hosted to celebrate a successful business deal, attended by nearly every significant figure in the Marchetti family's circle. Camille had dressed carefully, determined to represent herself and Vittorio well, and for most of the evening, things proceeded smoothly. Then Damien rose during the toasts, a glass of wine in hand, a predatory smile fixed firmly in place. "To Vittorio," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room, "for proving that even in difficult circumstances, a man can still find someone willing to marry him, though I suppose desperation makes people less particular about who they choose. No offense intended, of course. Camille, I'm sure your family's bakery does very well for itself, despite everything." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room, and Camille felt her face flush with humiliation, the careful composure she had maintained all evening threatening to crack under the weight of dozens of watching eyes. She glanced at Vittorio, expecting to find him frozen, unsure how to respond to a public insult delivered with such practiced precision. Instead, she found him staring at his cousin with an expression of pure, controlled fury, the kind of look that made even hardened men in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Damien," Vittorio said, his voice deceptively calm, cutting through the lingering laughter like a blade. "I believe you owe my wife an apology." The room fell silent. Damien's smile faltered slightly, clearly not expecting such a direct response. "I was only joking," he said, attempting to laugh it off. "You were not," Vittorio said, wheeling himself forward slightly, drawing every eye in the room toward him. "You have spent weeks attempting to undermine my marriage, spreading comments designed to belittle my wife in front of people whose respect matters to this family. I have allowed it because I believed you would eventually tire of your own pettiness. I was wrong." Camille sat frozen, stunned by the intensity in Vittorio's voice, by the way he had positioned himself so firmly, so publicly, on her side. "Camille is intelligent, strong, and far more valuable to this family than you have ever been," Vittorio continued, his eyes never leaving his cousin's increasingly pale face. "If you insult her again, in public or in private, you will answer to me directly. Do I make myself clear?" Damien's jaw clenched, humiliation and anger warring behind his eyes, but he nodded stiffly. "Perfectly clear," he said, and sat down quickly, avoiding the curious stares now directed his way. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze for Camille, her mind still reeling from what had just happened. It was not until later that night, alone in the study with Vittorio, that she finally found her voice. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes," Vittorio said simply. "I did." Camille studied him carefully, searching for the cold, guarded man she had first met weeks ago, but finding instead someone entirely different, someone who had chosen, publicly and without hesitation, to defend her. "Why?" she asked. Vittorio was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing how much of the truth he was willing to share. "Because you did not deserve his cruelty," he said finally. "And because somewhere along the way, without my permission, you've become someone I refuse to let anyone disrespect, even my own family." The admission hung in the air between them, heavier and more significant than either of them was fully prepared to acknowledge. Camille felt something warm bloom in her chest, fragile and uncertain, but undeniably real. "Vittorio," she said softly, "I need to tell you something. It's important." He looked up, curious. "What is it?" "I overheard something a few days ago," Camille said, her expression turning serious. "Damien was on the phone in the east hallway, speaking to someone I didn't recognize. He mentioned the Castellano family, and something about an arrangement that needed to stay quiet until the timing was right. I didn't think much of it at first, But after tonight, I think you should know." Vittorio's expression sharpened instantly, all traces of warmth replaced by cold calculation. "Tell me exactly what you heard," he said. "Every word you can remember." Camille recounted the conversation as best she could, watching as Vittorio's expression grew darker with each detail. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, processing what she had told him. "Thank you for telling me this," he said finally. "You didn't have to." "Yes," Camille said, echoing his earlier words back to him. "I did." A ghost of a smile touched Vittorio's lips, the first genuine one Camille had seen since her arrival at the estate. "It seems," he said quietly, "that you are far more valuable to this family than anyone anticipated, myself included." Camille felt her heart quicken at the warmth in his voice, at the way he was looking at her now, as if truly seeing her for the first time. Whatever this was between them, whatever fragile connection had grown from cold obligation into something far more complicated, it was no longer something either of them could deny. And as dangerous as that realization was, given everything Damien's betrayal now threatened to unleash upon their family, Camille found she was not afraid. For the first time since arriving at the Marchetti estate, she felt as though she truly belonged. The days following Camille's revelation moved with a new sense of urgency through the Marchetti household. Vittorio spent hours behind closed doors with Edmund and a handful of his most trusted men, piecing together the fragments of information Camille had overheard, trying to determine exactly what Damien was planning and how far his betrayal truly reached. Camille found herself drawn into these discussions more than she expected, her sharp memory and careful attention to detail proving useful again and again. She began to notice things others missed, small inconsistencies in Damien's behavior, the way he avoided certain rooms, the way his phone calls grew shorter and more secretive whenever she happened to be nearby. "You have good instincts," Edmund told her one afternoon, as they reviewed a timeline of Damien's recent movements. "Vittorio's father would have appreciated someone like you in this family." "I'm just paying attention," Camille said modestly, though the compliment warmed her more than she wanted to admit. "That's precisely the point," Edmund replied. "Most people in this world are too busy protecting themselves to truly pay attention to anyone else. You seem to do both at once." Camille thought about that comment later that evening, sitting across from Vittorio in his study as they reviewed the latest information their investigation had uncovered. Damien, it seemed, had been quietly meeting with representatives from the Castellano family for months, long before Camille and Vittorio's marriage had even been finalized. The arrangement, as best they could determine, involved Damien providing information about the Marchetti family's operations in exchange for support once he seized control of the family's businesses. "He's been planning this for a long time," Vittorio said grimly, setting aside a folder of documents Edmund had compiled. "Long before my father died. Long before the shooting." Camille's eyes widened as the implication settled over her. "You think Damien was involved in the attack that put you in this chair?" Vittorio's expression darkened further. "I don't know. Not yet. But it would explain a great deal. The timing, the way the ambush was arranged, how the shooters seemed to know exactly where I would be and when. The weight of that possibility hung heavily in the room." Camille reached across the space between them, resting her hand gently over his where it rested on the arm of his wheelchair. It was a small gesture, but it was the first time she had initiated such contact, and she felt Vittorio go still beneath her touch, the same way he had the night of the Castellano dinner. "We'll find out the truth," Camille said softly. "Together." Vittorio turned his hand beneath hers, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that felt far more intimate than either of them had intended. "Together," he agreed quietly, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply sitting in comfortable silence, the weight of the danger surrounding them somehow easier to bear when shared. Over the following days, their investigation deepened, and so did the connection, growing steadily between them. What had begun as forced proximity had transformed into something neither of them had expected to find in a marriage born from obligation and desperation. Camille found herself looking forward to their evenings together, treasuring the quiet moments in the garden, the therapy room, the study, moments that had nothing to do with business or danger, and everything to do with simply enjoying each other's company. One evening, as autumn settled over the estate and the garden's flowers began to fade, Camille found Vittorio sitting near the fountain, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. She joined him quietly, settling onto the stone bench beside his chair. "My mother used to say, sunsets were proof that endings could still be beautiful," Vittorio said softly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I never understood what she meant until recently." Camille glanced at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "What changed?" Vittorio turned to look at her, his dark eyes filled with an emotion she had never seen from him before, something warm and unguarded and entirely genuine. "You did," he said simply. Camille's breath caught in her throat. "Vittorio, I know this began as a business arrangement," he continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability of his words. "I know I told you I wanted nothing more than a contract between us. But I was wrong, Camille. These past weeks with you have shown me things about myself I thought were lost forever, buried beneath the weight of this chair and everything it took from me. You didn't just see past my injury. You saw past everything I built to protect myself from ever being hurt again." Camille felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the honesty in his words. "I never expected to feel this way either," she admitted softly. "I thought I would spend this marriage simply surviving it, keeping my head down, protecting my heart. But you make that impossible, Vittorio. You make me want things I never thought I'd have." Vittorio reached out, his hand cupping her cheek gently, and Camille leaned into his touch without hesitation. "I don't know what the future holds," he said quietly. "This life is dangerous, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I know that whatever happens, I don't want to face it without you beside me." Before Camille could respond, the moment was interrupted by hurried footsteps approaching from the house. Rowan appeared at the garden entrance, his expression tense. "Vittorio," he said urgently, "Edmund needs you immediately. It's about Damien. He's been spotted meeting with Castellano's men again, tonight, at a location outside the city. Edmund believes something is about to happen." Vittorio's expression shifted instantly from tender to sharp and focused, the transformation so complete it left Camille slightly breathless. "Tell Edmund I'm on my way," he said, already turning his chair toward the house. Camille rose quickly, following close behind. "What can I do?" "Stay here," Vittorio said firmly. "Stay safe. This isn't something I can risk you being part of." "Vittorio," Camille protested, "I've already helped uncover this. Let me help further." He paused, turning to look at her with an expression that mixed fierce protectiveness with genuine fear, the first true fear she had seen from him since the confrontation with Damien at dinner. "Camille," he said quietly, "if something happened to you because of my family's business, I don't think I could survive it. Please, stay here, where I know you're safe." The raw honesty in his plea silenced her protests. She nodded reluctantly, watching as he wheeled himself toward the house with Rowan close behind, disappearing into the shadows of the mansion, leaving her alone in the fading light of the garden, fear and worry twisting tightly in her chest. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Camille paced the halls of the estate, unable to settle, unable to focus on anything except the growing dread building steadily inside her. Margaret found her near midnight, still awake, still waiting, and for the first time since Camille's arrival, the housekeeper's expression softened into something like sympathy. "He'll be all right," Margaret said quietly, setting a cup of tea on the table beside Camille. "Vittorio has survived worse than his cousin's schemes." "I know," Camille said, though the words did little to ease the tightness in her chest. "I just wish there was something more I could do." "You've already done more than you realize," Margaret said, and something in her tone suggested a shift in her opinion of Camille, a grudging respect that had not been there before. This family needed someone willing to fight for it, not just marry into it. I think you may be exactly what Vittorio needed, even if none of us realized it at first. Camille offered a small, grateful smile, though her worry remained. It was nearly 2 a.m. when she finally heard the sound of car doors and hurried footsteps echoing through the entrance hall. She rushed toward the sound, relief flooding through her when she saw Vittorio being wheeled through the door, exhausted but unharmed, Edmund and Rowan close behind him, their expressions grim but resolute. "Vittorio," Camille breathed, rushing to his side. "We stopped it," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Damien's meeting with Castellano's men. We intercepted before anything could be finalized. But he knows we're onto him now. This isn't over, Camille. If anything, it's only just beginning." Camille knelt beside his chair, taking his hands in hers, her relief at his safety outweighing every other emotion. "Then, we'll face it together," she said firmly. "Whatever comes next." Vittorio studied her for a long moment, something fierce and grateful passing behind his dark eyes. "Together," he agreed, and this time, when he pulled her closer, there was nothing tentative about the way their lips finally met. A promise sealed in the quiet aftermath of danger narrowly avoided, a beginning neither of them had expected to find within the walls of a marriage built on obligation and fear. Neither of them could have known, in that fragile, hopeful moment, just how much more danger still lay ahead. The days that followed brought a tense, watchful quiet to the Marchetti estate. Damien had not been seen since the failed meeting with the Castellano representatives, and his absence unsettled Vittorio more than any open confrontation could have. Edmund doubled the security around the property, and Rowan rarely left Vittorio's side, his usual role as therapist momentarily set aside in favor of his other, more dangerous responsibilities. Camille noticed the change in the household immediately. Guards who once patrolled the grounds only occasionally now stood watch at every entrance. Margaret kept the household running with brisk efficiency, but Camille could see the worry etched into the lines of her face whenever she thought no one was looking. "He's planning something," Vittorio said one evening, reviewing reports with Edmund in the study while Camille sat nearby, no longer excluded from these conversations as she once had been. "Damien isn't the type to disappear quietly. He's regrouping. We have men watching every property associated with the Castellano family," Edmund said. "If he makes contact again, we'll know." "That's not enough," Vittorio said, frustration evident in his voice. "He grew up in this family. He knows how we operate. He knows what we'll expect. Whatever he's planning next, it won't be predictable." Camille listened carefully, her mind turning over everything she had learned about Damien since arriving at the estate months ago. "What about the vineyard property?" she asked suddenly. "The one near the coast. I overheard Damien mention it once, weeks ago, before any of this began. I didn't think anything of it at the time." Vittorio and Edmund exchanged a sharp glance. "The vineyard belonged to my mother's family," Vittorio said slowly. "It's rarely used anymore. Isolated, minimal security. It would be the perfect place to meet without being observed." Edmund was already moving toward the door. "I'll have it checked immediately." The confirmation came within hours. Damien had indeed been using the vineyard property as a meeting point, and according to Edmund's sources, another meeting was scheduled to take place there within the next 2 days. This time with a broader coalition of families interested in weakening the Marchetti empire, while Vittorio remained vulnerable following his injury. "We need a plan," Vittorio said grimly, once the household had gathered to discuss their next move. "If Damien succeeds in uniting these families against us, we lose everything. The businesses, the territory, everything my father spent his life building. And your life," Edmund added quietly. "Don't forget that possibility, Vittorio. If Damien believes eliminating you solves his problems permanently, he won't hesitate." Camille felt a chill run through her at those words, the danger of their situation suddenly feeling far more immediate and personal than it had before. She reached for Vittorio's hand instinctively, and he squeezed it gently, a silent reassurance that did little to ease the fear building steadily in her chest. Over the next 2 days, the household prepared carefully for what was to come. Vittorio and Edmund worked with a small team of trusted men, planning how best to intercept Damien's meeting and expose his betrayal before it could solidify into something irreversible. Camille found herself increasingly involved in these preparations, her sharp attention to detail and steady presence proving invaluable, though Vittorio remained firm that she would not be anywhere near the vineyard when the confrontation finally occurred. "I need you safe," he told her the night before, holding her close in the quiet privacy of his bedroom, a space that had slowly, naturally become theirs rather than simply his. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I need to know you're here, protected, away from danger." "I understand," Camille said softly, resting her head against his chest. "But promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back to me." "I promise," Vittorio said, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed the danger they both knew tomorrow would bring. The following afternoon, Vittorio departed for the vineyard with Rowan, Edmund, and a small team of trusted men, leaving Camille behind at the estate with strict instructions to remain inside, protected by the remaining guards. She tried to occupy herself with small tasks, anything to distract from the anxious churning in her stomach, but as the hours passed without word, her worry grew increasingly difficult to contain. It was nearly evening when everything went wrong. Margaret found Camille in the garden, her expression tight with alarm. "Mrs. Marchetti," she said urgently, "there's a call for you. It's your mother. She says it's an emergency. Something about your father." Camille's heart lurched with fear. She rushed inside, snatching up the phone. Margaret offered, but the voice on the other end was not her mother's. It was unfamiliar, male, and coldly calm. "Camille Dubois," the voice said, using her maiden name deliberately, a small cruelty designed to unsettle her further. "Your father is perfectly safe, for now. But if you want him to remain that way, you'll do exactly as I say. There's a car waiting outside your gates. Get in it, alone, and don't alert your husband's men, or the consequences for your family will be severe." Camille's blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "Someone who understands that Vittorio Marchetti values very little as much as he now values you," the voice said. "Consider this insurance, in case tonight's events don't unfold the way he hopes." The call disconnected before Camille could respond, leaving her standing frozen in the hallway, fear and panic warring for control. She knew, with sickening certainty, that this was connected to Damien, a contingency plan should his meeting with the Castellano coalition go wrong, and now her family and her own safety had become the leverage he intended to use against Vittorio. She should have alerted the guards immediately. She knew that. But the threat against her father, combined with the fear of what might happen if she did anything other than comply, pushed her toward the front gates before rational thought could fully take hold. A black car waited exactly where the caller had promised, and against every instinct screaming at her to turn back, Camille climbed inside. The drive felt endless, the city lights blurring past as fear tightened its grip around her chest. When the car finally stopped, she found herself outside an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of isolated location that made her stomach twist with dread. 2 men escorted her inside, and there, standing amid the shadows of the empty building, was Damien Marchetti, a cold, satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Camille," he said pleasantly, as though greeting an old friend rather than a woman he had just kidnapped. "I'm so glad you decided to cooperate. It makes this so much easier for everyone involved." "Where's my father?" Camille demanded, her voice shaking despite her attempt to sound steady. "Safe, for now," Damien said dismissively. "Though his safety depends entirely on how tonight unfolds. You see, Camille, my dear cousin, has proven far more resilient than I anticipated, and his little meeting with the Castellano coalition seems to be going poorly for my interests. I need leverage. And you, it turns out, are exactly the leverage I require." Fear coursed through Camille's veins, But beneath it, something steadier began to take hold, the same resilience that had carried her through every difficult moment of her life. "Vittorio will never give in to your demands," she said firmly. "You're only proving how weak your position truly is." Damien's smile faltered slightly, irritation flashing behind his eyes. "We'll see about that," he said coldly, gesturing to his men. "Make the call. Tell Vittorio exactly what's happened and exactly what he needs to do if he wants to see his precious wife again." Meanwhile, at the vineyard, Vittorio's carefully planned confrontation with Damien's coalition had unfolded with brutal efficiency. Edmund's intelligence had proven accurate, and with the element of surprise firmly on their side, Vittorio's men had successfully intercepted the meeting, exposing Damien's betrayal to the assembled families before their alliance could solidify. Faced with undeniable proof of his treachery, several of the coalition members quickly withdrew their support, unwilling to align themselves with a plan so clearly falling apart. But Damien himself was notably absent from the meeting, a fact that troubled Vittorio deeply, even as the confrontation resolved largely in his favor. "Something's wrong," Vittorio said to Edmund as they made their way back toward the cars. Damien wouldn't miss this, not unless he already knew it was compromised. His phone rang before Edmund could respond, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. Vittorio answered immediately, dread already building in his chest. "Vittorio Marchetti," Damien's voice said smoothly through the speaker. "I trust your evening went well. Mine, admittedly, did not unfold quite as planned, but I've found a suitable alternative to ensure this situation resolves in my favor." "Where is she?" Vittorio demanded, his voice sharp with barely controlled fury, some instinct already telling him exactly what his cousin had done. "Your wife is quite safe," Damien said, "provided you cooperate fully with what I'm about to ask. Come alone, Vittorio, to the old warehouse on Miller Street. Bring anyone else, alert the authorities, and I promise you, Camille will suffer the consequences immediately." The line went dead, leaving Vittorio gripping his phone with white-knuckled intensity, fear and rage battling for control within him. "Rowan," he said, his voice deadly calm despite the storm raging beneath the surface. "Get me to Miller Street. Now." "Vittorio, this could be exactly what he wants," Edmund cautioned. "A trap." "I don't care," Vittorio said fiercely. "He has Camille. Nothing else matters until she's safe." Despite Edmund's concerns, a plan quickly formed as they raced toward the warehouse. Rowan and a small team of trusted men positioning themselves strategically around the building's perimeter, while Vittorio, as instructed, approached alone, his wheelchair rolling steadily across the cracked pavement toward the entrance where Damien waited. Inside, Camille sat bound to a chair, her wrists secured but her spirit unbroken, glaring defiantly at Damien despite the fear still coursing through her. When Vittorio finally wheeled himself through the warehouse entrance, his eyes found hers immediately, relief and fury mixing violently behind his controlled expression. "Let her go, Damien," Vittorio said, his voice steady despite the danger surrounding him. "This is between us. She has nothing to do with our family's business." "On the contrary," Damien said, circling Vittorio's chair with predatory satisfaction. "She has everything to do with it. She's the reason you've grown soft, Vittorio, the reason you nearly stopped fighting for what's rightfully yours. I'm simply removing the distraction." "You're pathetic," Camille spat from her chair, drawing Damien's irritated attention. "Hiding behind kidnapping and threats because you're too weak to earn anything honestly." Damien's expression twisted with anger, and he moved toward her threateningly, but Vittorio's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Touch her, and I promise you, nothing will save you from what happens next." The standoff stretched tense and dangerous, every second heavy with the threat of violence. But Vittorio's men, positioned carefully outside, chose that exact moment to move, breaching the warehouse from multiple entrances simultaneously, overwhelming Damien's small contingent of guards before they could fully react. In the chaos that followed, Damien, realizing his plan had irrevocably collapsed, made a desperate lunge toward Camille, perhaps hoping to use her as a final bargaining chip. But Rowan intercepted him swiftly, subduing him with practiced efficiency, while Vittorio wheeled himself quickly to Camille's side, working frantically to free her from the restraints binding her wrists. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his hands trembling slightly as he finally freed her. "I'm all right," Camille said, though her voice shook with the lingering fear of everything she had endured. "I'm all right, Vittorio." He pulled her into his arms as best he could from his chair, holding her tightly, the relief of her safety washing over him in waves. "I thought I'd lost you," he murmured against her hair. "I've never been so afraid in my life." "You didn't lose me," Camille said softly, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. "I'm right here." Across the warehouse, Damien struggled uselessly against Rowan's firm grip, his carefully constructed plans lying in ruins around him. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You'll regret this, Vittorio." Vittorio turned his attention toward his cousin, his expression cold and unforgiving. "No," he said firmly. "It's very much over. Your betrayal, your attempted alliance with our enemies, and now this. There's no place for you in this family any longer, Damien. The council will decide your fate, but I promise you, whatever they choose, it will be far more merciful than you deserve." As Damien was led away in restraints, the danger that had shadowed their marriage since its very beginning finally began to lift. Vittorio turned back to Camille, cupping her face gently in his hands, gratitude and love shining unmistakably in his dark eyes. "Let's go home," he said softly. Camille nodded, leaning into his touch, the events of the night finally catching up with her exhausted body. "Yes," she agreed. "Let's go home." For the first time since their forced marriage began, the word home felt entirely, unmistakably true. In the weeks that followed Damien's arrest and removal from the family, a new sense of calm settled over the Marchetti estate, one that neither Camille nor Vittorio had experienced since their marriage began. The family council, presented with undeniable evidence of Damien's betrayal, stripped him of any claim to the family's businesses and territory, exiling him from the organization entirely. Rumors circulated that he had fled the city altogether, though Vittorio made it clear to Camille that he had no intention of pursuing further conflict, content simply to have neutralized the threat his cousin had posed. With the danger finally behind them, Vittorio found himself facing a different kind of challenge, one far more personal than any business threat or family betrayal. For months, he had kept a careful emotional distance from everyone around him, a defense mechanism built from years of loss and the crushing weight of responsibility placed upon him far too young. But Camille had slowly, patiently dismantled those walls, and now, with nothing left to distract him, he found himself confronting exactly how deeply she had come to matter to him. He found her one afternoon in the estate's kitchen, flour dusting her hands and apron as she carefully shaped dough into small, delicate pastries, humming softly to herself, entirely unaware of him watching from the doorway. It struck him then, watching her in that unguarded moment, just how much light she had brought into a house that had felt cold and lifeless for far too long. "You look happy," he said softly, wheeling himself into the kitchen. Camille glanced up, a warm smile spreading across her face. "I am happy," she said. "I haven't baked in months. It feels good to do something familiar again." "You could open a bakery here," Vittorio suggested, the idea forming spontaneously as he watched her work. "In the city. Whatever you need. Resources, staff, location. It's yours." Camille paused, surprised by the offer. "You'd do that? For me?" "Camille," Vittorio said, his voice growing serious, "I would do far more than that for you. These past months, you've given me back parts of myself I thought were lost forever, my sense of purpose, my ability to trust, even my willingness to hope for a future beyond simply surviving each day. I think it's time I gave you something in return." He wheeled himself closer, taking her flour-dusted hands in his own, entirely unbothered by the mess. "I know this marriage began as an obligation neither of us wanted," he continued. "A contract, forced upon us by circumstances beyond our control. But somewhere along the way, it became something else entirely, something real. I love you, Camille. Not because I have to, not because of any contract or family expectation, but because you are the most remarkable person I have ever known." Tears welled in Camille's eyes, overwhelming happiness replacing the fear and uncertainty that had defined so much of their early marriage. "I love you too, Vittorio," she said softly. "I think I have for a while now. I just wasn't sure you were ready to hear it." "I'm ready," he said firmly, pulling her down for a gentle, lingering kiss that spoke more clearly than any words could of everything they had built together, despite every obstacle placed in their path. Their happiness, however, was not without its remaining challenges. A few days later, Edmund approached them both with news that required careful consideration. The family council, impressed by how effectively Vittorio and Camille had navigated the crisis with Damien, had begun discussing a formal transition of greater authority to Vittorio, one that would require him to take a more visible, active role in the family's operations, despite his physical limitations. "They want to see you lead a formal council meeting," Edmund explained. "Publicly, it would silence any remaining doubts about your capability following the injury, and it would establish, once and for all, that neither Damien nor anyone else can exploit perceived weakness within this family again." Vittorio's expression tightened with old insecurities, the fear of being seen as diminished, still lingering, despite everything he had overcome. Camille, sensing his hesitation, reached for his hand. "You can do this," she said firmly. "You've already proven to me, to Edmund, to everyone who truly matters, that this chair doesn't define your strength. It's time the rest of the family saw that too." Vittorio studied her for a long moment, drawing courage from the unwavering confidence in her eyes. "All right," he said finally. "I'll do it, but only if you're there beside me." "Always," Camille promised. The council meeting took place 2 weeks later, in the same formal dining room where Damien had once humiliated Camille in front of the family's most influential members. This time, however, the atmosphere was entirely different. Vittorio wheeled himself to the head of the table with steady confidence, Camille seated proudly beside him, and addressed the assembled council members with the same commanding authority that had defined him long before the shooting had ever taken place. He spoke of the family's future, of new business ventures he intended to pursue, of the importance of loyalty and integrity within their ranks following Damien's betrayal. He spoke, too, of Camille, praising her intelligence and resilience, openly, publicly acknowledging the role she had played in uncovering his cousin's treachery and ensuring the family's continued stability. By the meeting's end, any remaining doubts about Vittorio's capability had been thoroughly dispelled, replaced instead by renewed respect and confidence in his leadership. As the council members departed, several stopped to offer their congratulations, not just on the successful resolution of the crisis, but on his marriage, praising Camille's strength and character with a sincerity that would have seemed impossible just months before. Later that evening, alone in their bedroom, Camille found Vittorio staring thoughtfully out the window at the darkened garden below. "You did wonderfully today," she said, moving to stand beside him. "We did wonderfully," he corrected gently, reaching for her hand. "I couldn't have gotten through any of this without you, Camille. Not the council meeting, not Damien's betrayal, not even the difficult months of therapy before you arrived. You've changed everything." Camille smiled softly, leaning down to press a gentle kiss to his forehead. "We changed everything," she said. "Together." Vittorio pulled her closer, settling her carefully onto his lap, mindful of his limitations but unwilling to let the moment pass without holding her close. "I have something to ask you," he said softly. "Something I should have asked properly, instead of simply signing a contract months ago." Camille's brow furrowed in curious confusion as Vittorio reached into the drawer of his nightstand, producing a small velvet box she had never seen before. "Camille Dubois Marchetti," he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate ring, far more personal and meaningful than the formal wedding band they had exchanged months earlier under such different circumstances. "Will you marry me?" Properly this time. Not because of any contract or family expectation, but because I love you more than I ever thought possible, and I want to spend whatever future I have left showing you exactly how much you mean to me. Tears streamed down Camille's face as she nodded, unable to find words adequate enough to express the overwhelming happiness flooding through her. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Vittorio, 1,000 times yes." As he slid the ring onto her finger, sealing this new, genuine promise between them, Camille felt the last remnants of fear and uncertainty that had defined the beginning of their marriage finally dissolve completely, replaced by a hope and happiness she had never dared to imagine finding within the walls of the Marchetti estate. Their story, born from obligation and desperation, had transformed into something neither of them could have predicted, a partnership built not on contracts or family expectations, but on genuine love, mutual respect, and an unbreakable bond, forged through danger and hardship. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, Camille knew, with absolute certainty, that she would face them exactly where she belonged. Beside Vittorio, always. A year passed, and the Marchetti estate that had once felt cold and guarded had transformed into something warmer, livelier, filled with the sounds of laughter and the smell of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen most mornings. Camille's small bakery in the city had opened to great success, her pastries becoming a favorite among locals who had no idea their creator was married to one of the most influential men in the region. She split her time carefully between the shop and the estate, refusing to give up the independence and identity she had worked so hard to build for herself, even as her role within the Marchetti family continued to grow. Vittorio's recovery, while still ongoing, had progressed further than anyone initially believed possible. With continued therapy and the steady, unwavering support Camille provided every step of the way, he had regained partial movement in his legs, enough to stand for short periods with the assistance of braces, a milestone that had brought tears to both their eyes the first time he had risen to greet her at the door, instead of remaining seated in his chair. "You didn't have to do that," Camille had said that day, overwhelmed with emotion as he stood, trembling but determined, to pull her into his arms. "I wanted to," Vittorio had replied simply. "I wanted to hold you properly, the way a husband should hold his wife." The family business, under Vittorio's steady leadership, had grown stronger and more stable than it had been in years, free from the internal threats that Damien's betrayal had once posed. Edmund remained a trusted advisor, and Rowan had become something closer to family than employee, his loyalty to both Vittorio and Camille unwavering through everything they had endured together. Damien himself had never returned, his exile permanent, his name rarely spoken within the estate's walls except as a distant, unpleasant memory of the danger they had overcome together. On a warm evening in early summer, exactly 1 year after their council meeting had cemented Vittorio's authority within the family, Camille found him once again in the garden near the fountain, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink, much as he had on that pivotal evening when he first admitted his growing feelings for her. "Do you remember what you told me?" she asked, settling beside him, resting her head against his shoulder as his arm wrapped securely around her. "About sunsets being proof that endings could still be beautiful?" "I remember," Vittorio said softly, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "I think I finally understand what your mother meant," Camille said. "It's not just about endings, though. It's about how something painful, something difficult, can transform into something beautiful if you're patient enough, brave enough to let it." Vittorio turned to look at her, love and gratitude shining unmistakably in his dark eyes. "Like us," he said quietly. "Like us," Camille agreed, smiling as she leaned in to meet his kiss, the warmth of the setting sun surrounding them both, a symbol of everything they had overcome and everything still waiting ahead. Their marriage, born from a contract neither of them wanted, had become the most cherished partnership either could have imagined, proof that even the coldest circumstances could give way to genuine warmth, that even the deepest wounds could heal into something stronger than before. Vittorio Marchetti, once feared for his ruthlessness and later pitied for his injury, had found something far more valuable than either reputation or physical strength. He had found love, genuine and unshakable, in the most unexpected of places. And Camille, the plus-size baker who had once walked into his study as a stranger, bound by obligation, had become the very heart of the home and family she had helped rebuild from the ashes of betrayal and fear. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the garden into soft twilight, Vittorio and Camille remained together, exactly where they belonged, their story a quiet testament to the truth that love, when given the chance to grow, could triumph over even the most impossible beginnings.